And hello and welcome once again to this reflection for Sunday, the 12th of July. I can't believe it. My goodness, where is the time going? Almost halfway through July now. Unbelievable. Whenever I look at the readings week in and week out, and there are set, there's a pattern. So if you don't know what a lectionary reading is, what happens is that there is a cycle, a 3-year cycle of set Bible passages for every single day of the year, actually, and certainly for every Sunday for all the preachers and ministers to look at. And I've always said that there's a good lesson in discipline when looking at these lectionary readings each week and sticking to them. I normally will stick to them. And as you know, occasionally I have a wobble and think, oh my goodness, I don't really want to preach on that today. But there is a real discipline. And as a preacher, some of those passages are extremely challenging. And yes, the truth is, in certain circumstances, they are totally unacceptable. For instance, many years ago, whilst training for the ordained ministry, I did an extended placement in a psychiatric hospital. Each Sunday morning, there was an act of worship in the chapel, and many of the wonderful individuals that attended were extremely poorly, sometimes needing to be accompanied by staff. Some of the more extreme behaviour witnessed most Sunday mornings as I was leading the service was as a direct result of the variety of illnesses and the symptoms that those illnesses displayed that these dear people were suffering from. Naturally, any Bible reading that focused on things like demon possession or the hearing of voices were to be avoided. In fact, all passages were chosen with tremendous care and a deepening understanding of the context in which I was leading worship. I still look back on that placement with fondness, and I carry the faces of those that I came to know. But of course I digress. So back to this Sunday's Gospel passage. As soon as I read it, my heart sank. And it sank for the simple reason that it is the one passage that I have heard preached on 1,000,000 times. Well, a lot of times anyway, perhaps not 1,000,000. But I've heard it preached on so many times, and usually at harvest. And of course, the passage comes with its own explanation. So in many ways, it leaves the preacher with nowhere to go. I was determined to actually leave this particular passage well alone when God kind of tapped me on the shoulder and said, "But you've never preached on this passage, have you?" That made me think. Surely I have, I thought. I must have done over the years. But no, I don't think I have. What a coward, I thought. Therefore, I decided to spend some time reading this passage, sitting with it, mulling it over. And then I thought, let's see then where God takes me. So, you'll be able to make up your own mind where God took me, because I'm going to tackle it. So let's read this passage together. And if you have your Bible, turn with me to Matthew chapter 13, verses 1 to 9, and then 18 to 23. So Matthew 13, 1 to 9 first, and then 18 to 23. Later that same day, Jesus left the house and went down to the shore, where an immense crowd soon gathered. He got into a boat, where he sat and taught as the people listened on the shore. He told many stories, such as this one. A farmer went out to plant some seed. As he scattered it across his field, some seeds fell on a footpath, and the birds came and ate them. Other seeds fell on shallow soil with underlying rock. The plants sprang up quickly, but they soon wilted beneath the hot sun and died because the roots had no nourishment in the shallow soil. Other seeds fell among thorns and shot up and choked out the tender blades. But some seeds fell on fertile soil and produced a crop that was 30, 60, and even 100 times as much as being planted. Anyone who is willing to hear should listen and understand. And on to verse 18. Now here is the explanation of the story I told about the farmer sowing grain. The seed that fell on the hard path represents those who hear the good news about the kingdom and don't understand it. Then the evil one comes and snatches the seed away from their hearts. The rocky soil represents those who hear the message and receive it with joy. But like young plants in such soil, their roots don't go very deep. At first they get along fine, but they wilt as soon as they have problems or are persecuted because they believe the word. The thorny ground represents those who hear and accept the good news, but all too quickly the message is crowded out by the cares of this life and the lure of wealth, so no crop is produced. The good soil represents the hearts of those who truly accept God's message and produce a huge harvest, 30, 60, or even 100 times as much as had been planted. So I wonder how many times you've heard that passage. Once or twice, I should imagine. Easy to switch off, isn't it? Thinking, well, I know what that's about. Jesus tells us. So let's just put ourselves in context. Let's look at where we are. So we're at the point in Matthew's Gospel where he introduces us to an extended account of Jesus' parables. Up to now, Jesus' teaching has included a few parables, but from now on, the parables become vivid. They're fully developed and they're actually the main vehicle for Jesus' teaching. So a parable is a story with a truth within it. And from now on in Matthew's Gospel, this is how Jesus teaches, through using these parables. Something else has also changed at this point in Jesus' ministry. And the thing that is changed is that it's its relationship with the religious leaders and rulers. Because up to this point, the location of the debates between Jesus and the religious leaders had been in the synagogues and in the meeting houses. But we can see in Matthew chapter 12, verse 24, that the religious leaders had formed a judgment about Jesus. So I'm just going to flip back to chapter 12, verse 24. Just read that. And it just says this. But when the Pharisees heard about the miracle, they said, "No wonder he can cast out demons. He gets his power from Satan, the prince of demons. So if from now on, in this point, the Pharisees, the religious leaders, are declaring Jesus to be the devil, then Jesus needs to change his strategy. And he does. He withdraws from those who stand so openly against him, and he goes to those who are keen to listen to him. And in this case, he goes to the edge of the seashore, to these crowds of ordinary folk, many of them uneducated, or certainly not educated to the extent that the religious leaders had been educated. So he goes to the crowds of the ordinary. And Jesus adopts a teaching method that focuses on parables, on these stories with a truth within them, stories about everyday, ordinary things. And Jesus is a great storyteller, and people hang on his every word. So join me and the crowd gathered on the beach. We are crowded together, no social distancing required here. So come and gather in. Get as close as we can get so that we can hear this extraordinary man speak, so that we can hear Jesus. He is in a boat, raised up just a little so that his words are clear and strong, and everyone around us is silent. There is expectation. He begins to talk. He talks about a farmer planting his seed, and within sight, up on the surrounding hills, up, we can all see someone hard at work, casting their seed. And so we understand this story. We understand the challenges of the farmer. We know that here in ancient Palestine, the fields are long and thin. We know that between each field there is a public footpath of earth. And this footpath of earth has been trampled so often that it is as hard as a concrete pavement. We know this footpath. We know this is the wayside that Jesus talks about. We also know that no farmer deliberately scatters his seed onto the footpath or onto the wayside. Not on purpose will the farmer scatter the seed there, but it will fall there anyway. And it can be the best seed ever, but it will never grow there. As Jesus talks to us, and we hear the story, and we see the farmer, we nod knowingly. We see that farmer up in the hills, and we know his seed that falls on the footpath or on the wayside, we know it will never grow. And as we glance up at those hills, where the farmer is still working, we listen to the story that Jesus is telling. And as we hear his story, we also know about the Palestinian soil. We know how rocky it is. We know that in places the soil is not very deep at all, and just under the surface is that hard rock. So we know that soil can hold very little water. We look at those sat either side of us and we nod. We know that the seed planted here where the soil is rocky will spring up quickly, and an inexperienced farmer would get most excited to see his seed springing up so quickly, but the tender plants soon wilt and they die. We also know that no farmer would deliberately cast their seed into the weed beds, but it falls there too. And the weeds always seem to grow more quickly than the seed, and no seed is going to survive amongst the weeds, no matter how good the seed is. Only the portion of the seed that falls on fertile soil has a chance of producing a good harvest. The farmer loses much of his seed when planting, but it is still worth the enormous effort and the risk because of that eventual harvest. It is worth the effort and the risk, even when an enormous amount of the seed that gets planted never grows. Here in Palestine, a crop producing tenfold would be good. It would be good, and the farmer would be pleased. But in the story that Jesus tells, Jesus talks of a crop of 30, 60, and even 100 times as much as he has planted. We glance up again at the farmer up in the hills, high above the seashore. Is it possible to achieve such a harvest? Anyone who is willing to hear should listen and understand. We sit for a long time on that beach after Jesus has finished his story. A long time thinking. And still we know and can see the farmer high up in the hills. It wasn't really about a farmer and the struggles he has with his seed, was it? When we put these parables into their context, when we put ourselves there, they become alive, don't they? Could you see that beach? I wonder. Could you see the beach? Could you see the crowd? Could you see Jesus in the boat? Could you see those hills rising above? The long strips of land where the farmers labour to sow their seed. Could you see them? I could see them. In my mind's eye, I could see them. I wonder how many in that crowd that day knew that Jesus was talking about the kingdom, talking about them and their attitude to God and God's messenger. I wonder how many in that crowd knew and understood. It's very interesting to me to reflect that the disciples who were present, those that were in training, who were following Jesus, who had learnt so much, it was the disciples that needed an explanation later. I wonder where then, as we think about all of that, I wonder where in our own lives is there room for God? Where is our fertile soil? Where is our fertile soil? And if we rewrote this parable today, what analogy would we use? Maybe farming works for you. Perhaps in the North Yorkshire Dales, farming is understood, but further afield, in our cities and our towns, what analogy would we use today if we were going to rewrite this parable? Technology, perhaps. Technology. The message lost to those with no internet access. The message viewed by many as it goes viral, but then quickly killed off by the next fad that goes viral. The message choked by a myriad of fake news items. And then the message eventually and slowly spread through trusted and reliable sources. Does that analogy work? Kind of. It certainly makes you think, doesn't it? The whole passage has made me think. And you know what? I am glad that I gave it a go for the first time ever. God bless you today as you think about this very familiar story and what it might mean for you. Amen.